here with Reaction. He's the co-chair of American Security at AFP. We have retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg is with us. General, great to have you. Thank you for being with us. All right, so from my perspective, and maybe there's a different perspective on this, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Let's start with the enriched uranium. The Iranians have been told by the president they can never be a nuclear power. They said they have an inalienable right to have a nuclear weapon. The president says no. They said they had the right to enrich uranium. The president said no. We know they have 60% enriched uranium. We have to worry, obviously, about small amounts of that being turned into a dirty bomb, but more importantly, that 60% could be enriched to weapons grade 90% in less than 12 days. So is it possible to entomb that uranium that they have? And would that be secure enough so that they never can use that uranium in the future? Or is it something that we'll just have to take if they're not willing eventually to hand it over?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me tonight. Look, Marco Rubio, Secretary Rubio said the old world order is gone. He's right. You know, when we had the negotiation in Pakistan with the vice president, you know, they're dealing with people who really don't like us. They're authoritarian. They're theocratic. They say death to America. They kill thousands of their own people. Remember, this is a war, and President Trump is a wartime president. You're right about that. And I think what he needs to do, taking the extreme position, right now we need to be ready to go and take Kellogg Island and take the islands like Iraq Island in the Gulf region, the Strait of Hormuz. You can do that with our great Marines. You can do that with the 82nd Airborne. You can do it all, and it can be done. You know, I'm reminded a little bit of our Civil War. It wasn't until 1864 that Ulysses S. Grant was turned to by Lincoln and said, finish this war. He did it within a year. And he did it primarily by sending Sherman through the March to the Sea when he broke the back of the Confederacy economically. That's what we need to do. And the president, as a wartime president, should do that. You can't negotiate with these guys. I don't think you can. There may be regime adjustment, but these guys are this attuned to doing this. You see Pezeshkian right now, their president, finally getting involved. He's saying things. He's really not a Revolutionary Guard, but as long as you got people like Karachi out there who keeps pushing the ball, he keeps trying to negotiate. The president laid out very clear terms. He's been right on this. You were right on it, too, just a minute ago when you talked about Kellogg Island. In 1988, President Trump said, take Kellogg Island if something happens. He said that to The Guardian during an interview. I think we need to go to that position. We need to be hardcore about it, take it down, finish them now, finish them once and for all, so that your kids, your grandkids, we don't have to worry about this in the future. By getting that uranium out of there, and we need to take control of that. The IAEA needs to take control of it. Somebody needs to control it. We do not need to leave that in Iran right now. They're under JCPOA. They were allowed to enrich uranium to 3.67%, not to 60 or 70%. There must be a reason if you're going to 60 or 70%, and that's to get a weapon. And you don't need a weapon in the Iranian hands.
You know, the vice president said, well, the president would like to deal with a normal country. The problem is they're not a normal country. They're a death cult. They're an Islamic fascist regime. They have no qualms about strapping bombs on innocent men, women, and children and having them kill, you know, other people and promising them 72 virgins in heaven. They have no problems when the president says he's going to target bridges and infrastructure of using human shields, knowing that those people would die in the process. They don't have a problem with that. They don't think rationally the way we think. They don't put human life above. They don't put the priority on human life and the love of human life that we have. So that's a problem. And they're the #1 state sponsor of terror. I appreciate the president being patient to give them a small taste of what life without an economy is going to look like with this blockade that's going on. However, I'm not sure that they're ever going to come to their senses. They were given an opportunity before Midnight Hammer to negotiate. They were given an opportunity before Israel bombed. They had 50 days in the lead up to that. They were given an opportunity before Epic Fury. Every time they're given an opportunity, they pass. And they pass on the side of radical Islamic fascism. So I'm not sure if they won't pass again.
I think you're right. I think now is the time in this war, and it is a war, it's not a business deal, and President Trump is a wartime president, and he's the only president in the last 8 presidents that had the guts to do something about it. Finish the job. Finish him off. There may be a regime adjustment going on right now, but this regime constantly goes back to the old way of doing business, which is hate America and do something to destabilize. I was in Iraq. I saw the advanced IEDs that the Iranians produced and brought into Iraq when they killed friends of mine. And these are the type of people they are. So I think it's time we finish them off, finish it now. You can do that economically. You can take them to a position where you strangle them, and that's what they need to do.
You know, and the sad thing is, General, President Trump can permanently destroy their economy, which is oil-based, probably in under an hour. It wouldn't take that much. It would be a simple military task. The harder part would be extracting, as the president affectionately calls it, dust, or the 60% enriched uranium. I hope reason prevails, but based on their history, I have no reason to believe that will happen. But we appreciate you being with us, General. Thank you. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.